Welcome to the Every Brain is Different podcast. It is Samantha and Lauren here with you, and today we are talking about school supports and what the difference is between 504 accommodation plans and IEPs, also known as individual education plans. So, if you've ever thought that your child needs help at school, but aren't sure what to ask for, you are not alone. I have talked to so many parents who are like, my kid needs help at school, but I don't know how to ask. I don't know if he's even eligible. I don't know what to do. And so that's what we're going to talk about today.
Be very complex navigating getting stuff from school too.
Oh, yeah. Even when
Even if you, yeah,
I knew the system, and it still took almost a year to get my kid an IEP
yeah. I think
with me.
school and getting services and stuff like that is one of the bigger places where you really have to be an advocate for your child and a squeaky wheel.
Yes. So I even was with a school that they were amazing with special education and they did what I asked, but it took me asking and knowing what to ask. Like they didn't offer things up just because IEPs cost schools money, and so they don't want to do them. They have to hire people to do them, and they're just underfunded, and they don't have the staff to do IEPs, and so they really don't want to put kids on IEPs because then they're like by law they have to do what's in the IEP, and if they're not doing what's in the IEP, then they can get in a lot of trouble from the state. So yeah,
If not advertising.
that's why a lot of schools aren't advertising these things. And so once again, confusion around these things for parents is very common. And today we're going to hopefully bring some clarity to that, hopefully not overwhelm you, but just let you know what the difference between the two main school supports are. And then school support plans aren't about labeling your child. They're about accessing things that help your child navigate the school environment and be successful. And neurodivergent kids don't need to try harder. We've talked about this so much, like that if you're neurodivergent, or even if you're not neurodivergent and just have other needs in school, like, you don't need to try harder. You just need an environment that works with your brain.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of kids that are neurodivergent and they try so hard to do what's expected of them. Like, I know someone that had an eye processing issue. She did hours of homework every night to stay up with her class, and she was in elementary school. So imagine going to elementary school all day long and then coming home and doing hours of homework once you're home so that you can stay with your class. And then once she got the support she needed, didn't have to do that as much. So that was awesome. But when kids aren't supported in school, they often are seen as misbehaving. That's what their behavior gets labeled, and their behavior is misunderstood. It's labeled as misbehaving. It's not labeled as, oh, this kid has no idea what's going on in class because of an access issue, not a trying issue. Like they might be trying as hard as they can to pay attention, but their brain just won't let them. And so then they start doing things that they're thinking about and getting distracted and not doing their assignments, where a teacher might be like, you're doing that on purpose. They're really not. They just don't have the right supports in place to help them be successful. And then, yeah, kids are labeled as defiant or lazy or unmotivated. I know my son has pathological demand avoidance, PDA, and when he misunderstood something, he just became defiant. And he would do things like tip over a desk and tap dance on it because he knew that would get him kicked out of class and he wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. But they were like, he's just being a class clown and he's just doing this just to misbehave. And I'm like, I promise you he's not. He doesn't understand what's going on. He gets embarrassed. He gets overwhelmed. He wants to leave the environment. And he's learned that if he does these certain things, he gets
He
to
gets to
leave.
leave. Yeah.
And so once we got supports in place for him, it was a lot better. But yeah, he learned that like if he went over and made some noise in the corner and like kicked a trash can or something, not knocking it over, just like kicking it, that he would get to leave class because they were afraid that it would escalate. And I am not blaming teachers in this scenario. Like, I'm just saying what happens when a kid isn't supported.
Mhm.
And it goes on the other side too. If a kid is able to do work that's above their level, like above the grade level that they're in, they might get bored and quote unquote misbehave because they're bored and they've done all the work. And so they might need an IEP too or an accommodation plan to help them so that their like brain is stimulated all day instead of just doing the work and then getting bored and then getting into trouble because they're bored. So let's talk about what a 504 plan is. A 504 plan is easier to get than an IEP. You don't have to have a diagnosis, you don't have to have any of that. It just provides accommodations so your child can access learning. It does not change what they learn, it just changes how they access it. So, some examples of accommodations are extra time on tests, movement breaks, preferential seating. So, they might be sat in the front of the room so the teacher can check in with them more often than if they're, or they might sit by the teacher's desk so the teacher can check in with them and be like, hey, how you doing? I know for my son, what really helped him was sitting by the teacher's desk, and the teacher would come over and say, okay, I want you to do these 3 math problems, because he would get overwhelmed when he would get a whole sheet of math problems. He would just get completely overwhelmed and then do something disruptive so he'd get kicked out of class. But if the teacher, even if she was sitting at her desk, she could be like, hey, how about you do these problems? And then I'm going to check in with you when you're done with those problems. And then she came back, okay, let's do these 3 more problems. And she didn't say do the whole thing in one shot. It was like, do these 3, then these 3, then these 3. And then eventually he got the whole thing done. But it wasn't like, do these 20 problems right now.
Just broke it down for him.
Yeah, she broke it down. But that was she was able to do that because he was near her and wasn't clear across the room. And then reduced homework can be an accommodation. My son got that too, where he didn't have to do all the work because once again, he got very, very overwhelmed by doing the whole assignment. He just had to show that he understood what they were teaching, and that was enough because that's the whole point of turning work in, is to show that you understand it. And so the team was able to be like, okay, he out of 20 problems, he needs to do 10. If he gets those 10, like, mostly correct, then he doesn't need to work on it anymore because he's shown us that he knows what he's doing. And then sensory support. So if they need a fidget, if they need to sit on a bouncy, not a bouncy ball, but those,
Little seat things that,
yeah, like a TC
yeah.
or an exercise ball or any of those kind of things, just giving them sensory supports. And then who qualifies as any child with something, diagnosed or not, that impacts learning. So they might be diagnosed with ADHD, autism, just what's it called when you have trouble reading?
Dyslexia?
Dyslexia. So they might have dyslexia, dysgraphia, anxiety, any of those things. They might be diagnosed with those things, or they might not. If your kid is showing signs that they're struggling in school, this is a great place to start. And the key point of a 504 is there's no specialized instruction. They are not changing what is taught. They're not changing how they teach it. They're just supporting your child within the general education classroom. They're not pulling them out for anything. They're not getting an aid. They're not going to the special education room. It is all done in the general education classroom. So it helps your child stay in the classroom, be successful, but doesn't change how they get that instruction. And then an IEP is a specialized document that provides specialized instruction and accommodations. So a 504 gives access to supports, and an IEP gives access to those accommodations plus teaching differently. So an IEP includes individualized goals. They might have like communication goals, motor skills goals, cognitive goals. This might be where your kid gets speech and language services in school, or they get occupational therapy or physical therapy. Some schools offer music therapy. Okay, fun fact, you can request a music therapy assessment in any school that you're in, and it will be pushed back on. But if you think your child needs music therapy for an educational reason, you can request that, and they have to grant you an assessment. And they will say, nope, we don't have to do that. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. So if you're
Be
interested,
that squeaky wheel.
yeah, there are schools that employ music therapists, which is amazing, but they're never going to do that if parents aren't the squeaky wheel and get that ball rolling. So individualized goals are on IEPs. They have like specific criteria to meet. They give you like progress reports, all that stuff. And then they also have specialized instruction in reading, behavior, social skills. I know kids that go to social skills classes. When I worked at the school, I actually taught a social skills class, and it was a music therapy social group. And they did not pay me the rate of a music therapist, but I wanted to get out of my other job, so I just volunteered to do it. Don't do that. I should have advocated more. I was young. So
But it was nice of you.
yeah. I worked with this girl who needed a one-on-one aid, and she needed social skills training. And so we went and did a social skills group with a couple of the other kids. So it was fun. But that's the other thing that an IEP can give you is a one-to-one aid. I will say it is very, very, very difficult to get a one-to-one aid because schools do not want to do that. That is the highest level of support, and they don't want to give you that. Not that they don't care, it's just very expensive and very, very hard to find people to fill those roles.
Yeah.
So, once again, as if we haven't hammered this in enough, a 504 offers support and accommodations. An IEP offers individualized goals, specialized instruction, related services such as speech, OT, PT, music therapy, all those things. And then for an IEP, they have to get assessed. Your child must meet specific criteria under specific categories. So to get an IEP for like preschool, my kids were assessed and they had to meet a certain number of categories in the 7th percentile or less to get an IEP for preschool in a public school. But it's different for an IEP in like typical grade schools. I don't know what that is, but you do have to meet a certain criteria or you cannot get an IEP. For an accommodation plan, you don't have to meet any criteria. You just have to go ask the school for it in writing. And then it has to show educational impact. So this is the big thing that parents forget about. Like your kid might have trouble with social skills. They might have trouble with talking or motor skills or any of that. But if it's not impacting their education, the school is not able to provide services for that. So if your kids reading and writing and all of that is great and they just have some trouble like speaking, they're not going to give you like an IEP if it's not impacting the education. And that's where I think a lot of parents get hung up. They're like, but my kid needs all this help. But if they're doing great education wise, then the school's not going to provide it. I know that, and this is, I think, is terrible about the IEP process. My son had to be completely failing. He was a grade level behind before they would give him help. So I wish it was if they start falling behind, then they immediately step in and help. But he had to be completely failing before they gave him an IEP, which
Which
is
is
unfortunate.
really
Yeah.
unfortunate because you shouldn't have to fail to
Yeah.
show that you need the supports.
Yeah. So I truly believe that if they would have stepped in when he started falling behind, he would never have fallen down to a grade level below where he was supposed to be, because he would have had those supports and that individualized teaching that would have helped him from the get-go rather than waiting. Because in kindergarten, he was fine, like on grade level, whatever. And then I don't know what happened in first grade, but I don't know. He just started falling behind. And I wish that we could have gotten help sooner rather than taking that whole year to get approved for an IEP. So there's my rant on that. But yeah, and then emotional regulation, behavior, and executive functioning all count if it impacts your child's education. So if they're having trouble in any of those areas, the school can help with that. It just has to impact their education. And just for more clarification, the differences between a 504 plan and an IEP, the 504 plan just offers accommodations. The IEP is accommodations plus specialized instruction. The 504 plan is executed by the general education teacher. The IEP may include pullout support, so they may go to the special education classroom. They might go to the counselor's office. Like, it just depends on who's providing that support. They might have a member of the special education team come into the classroom and do that support. They always try to do the least restrictive environment that's appropriate for your child. So if they don't have to pull them out of the general education classroom, they're not going to do that. If they don't have to like stop interaction with their peers, they're not going to do that. They're going to keep your kid in the general education classroom as long as possible, but it's not always appropriate. So you can fight for that too. And you can say, you're saying that the general education classroom is the least restrictive environment, but these things are happening when my child goes in that classroom. Here's what happens when they go in the special education classroom. And so you can fight to have your kid in a different classroom if the general education classroom is not meeting their needs. But the school will always lean toward keeping your child in the general education classroom. And then a 504 plan doesn't really have a lot of formal tracking, where an IEP has measurable goals and progress tracking. They send you reports. They don't really do that for 504s. And then it's easier to qualify for a 504, and you have to meet more criteria for an IEP. And in parent-friendly language, so I've been told, is a 504 means support the environment. An IEP means support the environment and teach skills. Neither is better. It just depends on what your child actually needs. If they need a 504, that's great. If they need an IEP, that's great too. It does not matter. That's just the difference between them. So if you want to get an IEP or a 504, the first step is to put the request in writing. Don't call the school. Don't talk to them in person. You have to put it in writing, because they have 60 days from, I think it's 60 business days. It's not like 60 days total, but 60 business days to complete the necessary assessments to get your child an IEP or a 504. And you need to use clear language. You can't just say, I'm wondering if this would be right for my kid. No, I am requesting an evaluation for supports. Use those words. I am requesting an evaluation for supports, and make it and date it. So yeah, that's why you email, because then it's dated. And then if they don't do the assessment, that's when you can take it further up the chain and say, hey, my request was not done. What do I need to do to get this done? And you can just take it up the chain of command until you get some help. I know parents, I feel like I'm villainizing schools, but they're just so overwhelmed and overworked. You really have to be an advocate for your kid to get anything done, just because they're so overwhelmed. Like, these teachers and principals and other administrators and related service people, they want to help you. They just have so many kids on their caseload that it's hard to help everyone. And so that's why you have to be such a big advocate.
Yeah.
But when the school evaluates your child for supports, they're going to evaluate academic skills, behavioral skills, and social emotional learning. And then after they evaluate all those things, you will have a meeting where like the school psychologist will come, the school counselor, the general education teacher, sometimes the special education teacher will come. And then if any related services were assessed, like for occupational therapy or speech or something like that, they'll come to the meeting too, where a principal or the vice principal will come and you'll have an eligibility meeting. You are part of the team in this meeting. You can disagree, you can ask questions. I really recommend that you ask a lot of questions about what's going on. And if you disagree with something, then disagree with it. So in my kid's IEP, they put some stuff in, and I'm like, that's not going to work for him. Here's what I suggest instead. And they're like, oh, thank you for telling us. That's not going to happen every time. They might push back, but you can also push back, and don't be afraid to push back. You have to be such an advocate for your kid. It is
Yeah.
so hard. And it was hard for me. Once again, I knew the process and I was working with a school that was fairly amiable to doing what I asked them to
Yeah.
do. If you run into a school that now my son is in an online school that I am not impressed with their special education department, and we had a meeting, and instead of like coming to me with solutions, they're like, well, what do we do? If you don't follow these rules, he's going to get kicked out of school. And I'm like, well, no, duh, Sherlock. Like, I'm trying. What can you offer to help me with? They're like, well, what do you think we should do? And so then I told them what we should do, and they're like, I don't think that's going to work. Okay, what other plans do you have? Like, you didn't bring me anything. And so it just, you have to keep in mind that general education teachers, principals, vice principals, all those people, they do not have training in special education.
Yeah.
They don't
They
have
don't.
behavioral training. They don't have any, like, they might have taken one class in college about special education. They don't understand your child's disability like you do. And so that's why you have to fight for it. And so, like, with this principal, she's like, well, you just need to make your kid do it. Okay, he has pathological demand avoidance. You don't think that if I could just say to him, do this now, I would do that? Like, there is no amount of punishment or consequences that he even gives a crap about. And so we have to work a little differently. Like, obviously, I'm not going to let him just get away with everything and not do what he's asked to do, but you have to come at it a different way rather than just like, you're going to do this. Because kids with PDA, you have a kid with PDA, you know that they're not going to just say, oh, okay, you told me to do it. Okay, I'll do it. No, that's not happening. So just remember that was an awakening for me the other day when I was in that meeting. And she's like, I don't have any training in behavioral therapy. I was like, yeah, I know. I can
Clearly.
tell. I can tell. And I'm not blaming her. Once again, it's the system. It's not the individual people, it's the system. If learning about disabilities was more important, then the teachers and the administrators would get more training rather than just a special education teacher.
Yeah.
So, not blaming them. I'm just saying it's the system and the system is messed up. So,
So you gotta be loud.
you you
Loud,
have to
proud.
be loud and advocate for your kid. And then once eligibility meeting is done, they will tell you if your kid qualified or if they didn't qualify. And if they qualified, then they will make up goals. And you can be part of making the goals, but generally the special education teacher and the related services people make the goals. And then they share them with you, ask if it's okay. If they're not okay, just say it. If they're good with you, then that's great. And then the IEP will be started and monitoring will be done. And once a year, you will come back for an IEP meeting. And every 3 years, they have to do all the tests again to qualify for a new IEP. So it's not every year that you have to qualify for the IEP. It's just every 3 years they do eligibility again. And just remember that you're not asking for favors. You're asking for your child to have access to the education that they need in order to survive. Survive in school. Yeah, survive in school.
I was like, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. You're just asking for the accommodations that your kid needs to thrive in school. I think I was trying to say thrive in another word at the same time, and survive came out. But here are some common mistakes that parents make. Waiting too long because you think your kid will grow out of it. That generally does not happen. And then accepting vague supports, like you come to the school with an issue and they're like, oh yeah, we'll keep an eye on it. No, don't accept that. And then not realizing that maybe the bad behavior that you're seeing, or I put that in quotes for people that aren't watching this, is communication. So what is your child communicating that they need to thrive in the way that they're, so they're having bad behavior. What's that communicating? And how can we help them so they're not having that behavior anymore? And just remember, you don't have to figure this out alone. Understanding school systems is very overwhelming, especially when you're already parenting a dysregulated child and they might be dysregulated at home. So then you have that stress. If you want support in navigating any of this, you can join the neurodivergent parenting community. We'd love to have you. It can be found at everybrainsdifferent.com. And yeah, I would love to support you. Even if you don't join the community and you have questions, send me an email. You can find my email at everybrainsdifferent.com. Schedule a free consultation. I would be happy to walk you through this process and help you in any way that I can. And just remember, like always, the goal is not perfection, it's to understand and advocate for your child.
Yes.
Not being perfect at that. Mic drop. No. Anyway, we'll see y'all next week.